Hello there, Pathfinders, and welcome to another edition of Phil Talking D20, specifically about skills, mad skills, all kinds of skills. We've got the skills, we can get it done. What do I mean by skills? Spelt with a Z for obviously street cred purposes. Well, there's been several videos bobbing about lately talking about skills, and I've been thinking about skills and using skills quite a lot. So, for me, Pathfinder 2 has some really great mechanics. Some absolutely fundamental, groundbreaking, incredible, game-changing mechanics that will revolutionise your gaming world. Well, uh, probably won't. But if you are constantly going into combats and you are constantly kind of hammering into them head on, like a juggernaut, like some kind of unstoppable mad berserker, you're probably playing a barbarian. And well done. Carry on. But don't underestimate the power of skills. So, Knights of Last Call did a great video on stealth recently, and they did a big deep dive on all the wonderful kind of brilliant nerdy mechanics of perception and stealth and hiding and how that particular skill broke down. And it's really good because it's one of those really useful skills. So, props to them. Definitely check it out. There's been other videos that have caught my attention as well over the many months since I last posted a video. Well, a few weeks, to be brutally honest with you. But it feels like many months, doesn't it? Because I am the world's most unreliable YouTuber. Well, to put a spin on skills in the form of rolling a d20 and seeing what number we get, here's those big advantages broken down in a much more general format. So, the first very useful thing about skills is obviously you have passives. Why are passives so important? It gives people a DC to roll against, be that a games master or a player. Now, from a perspective of speed and ease of use, it makes your life a lot easier. But it's not the best trick that skills have got for us. So we're just going to dabble in it for a little while before we move on to the really hot, juicy topics. So, what do I mean by passives? If you've played 5e, you are already aware that in 5e they use a passive perception score. And it's basically, what is your perception? Add 10. Pathfinder have taken that to the next level and applied it to anything and everything in the form of what's your passive acrobatics, what's your passive, what's your passive performance. Yeah. What they're doing with that mechanic is they're measuring a general aptitude, a general kind of capability that's kind of in a non-stressful, non-vital, role-play-esque moment. A very useful benchmark for a throwaway comment like the bard in the pub says in a kind of bit of a chit-chat role-play session, I'm going to go and do a performance. And you can't be bothered to hurl the life and death threat of a dice roll at them because they just want to do a nice song. And that's really all they wanted to do. And it wasn't the be-all and end-all. They weren't trying to impress the king, or they weren't trying to woo a wonderful lady. They were just simply trying to kind of throw in some kind of capable, kind of fun element to the role play, and Bob's your uncle. That's all they wanted. At that point, simply go, well, what's your passive perform? Now, low-level character, they might have a 6 in performs, that's a 16. If you're looking at the skills kind of guidance for DCs, a DC 15 on the simple side of things is normally generally accepted as a fairly successful, task completed. It's not life or death mega hard. Like I said, you're not trying to impress a king. It's just good enough for everyone to go, oh, that was all right. Nice. Bob's your uncle. That's all you need. What's your passive performance, mate? Oh, wonderful. Yeah, no, everyone's fairly impressed with that. Thanks very much. Offer them the opportunity to roll, because some people just want to roll for everything because they're addicted to the sound of the clitter-clatter of dice. But don't always bog down in it. Now, again, a throwaway comment about they want to kind of you know, jump and sit down on a chair by like vaulting over the back of it to kind of sit down in the pub as the same exact thing but using acrobatics, for example. And they've got a 9 in acrobatics. That's a 19 passive. Pathfinder goes so far as to give, in the skills section where they're talking about DCs, a guidance on when certain things at certain levels are simply accomplished. Don't bother rolling anymore. You are walking through the forests and you come across a log bridge across a fairly deep precipice, but the log isn't particularly filthy, isn't mossy, isn't sodden, isn't rotten, isn't slippery with fungus and mould. It's just a sturdy log, well maintained, for walking across as a thin bridge. And your party are kind of level 4 or 5, and it's a DC 15. They don't need to roll. You know, it's that kind of a guidance in the skill section. It's very useful to kind of refresh on the DC section. The DC section as a whole has kind of 3 elements to it. One is a table that gives you some guidance on what kind of levels certain elements of DC become kind of, they can just do it, it's fine. And there's a good guide and a good table that breaks down certain actions that are typical in an adventure through certain levels and their typical DCs, and at which point they kind of bypass them. And the table lays that out pretty straightforwardly for you to see and understand and go, oh, I've got the hang of that now. Great, thanks very much. It also touches on simple DCs, which are the classic stables 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, etc. They've been around for years. 5e still uses it, 4th E uses it, 3rd edition and 3.5 used it in D&D, Pathfinder 1 used it. And you know, for most of us, that's much of a muchness. Oh, it's a DC 15. Oh, it's a DC 20. Those kind of off the cuff, need a quick DC. Oh, it's a bit windy and it's a bit, you know, mossy and damp, so the log actually is a DC 20. So can you roll for it, please? In case you slip or the wind catches you unawares. Bit of pressure, bit of drama, bit of tension. However, if it isn't, it comes down. And if they are at a certain level and they don't need to roll for it, they just move on, because time is precious. However, they also have some guidance on what they call advanced DCs. Those are typically kind of level related. Challenge rating is a term that's used in 5e and has been used for many years in many RPGs, going back through the ones I've just mentioned. But the reality of that is it gives you a slightly more finicky, precise DC for the real kind of maths nerds. You don't really need to use them. They're not kind of selling them as the be-all and end-all. But if you have certain things that you want to get very specific about ahead of time, you can do that by looking at a level that you think the challenge is. Maybe that is a monster's level and you want a guide on what that might be, because maybe you've created a monster or the monster's going to do something that's not within its normal parameters, and so you want a guide on that, and it's a level 4 monster, so you go to level 4 and you look at that part of the table and you go easy, medium, hard, and you pick the hard one. Bob's your uncle. They generally, as a rule of thumb, kind of nitpick around the kind of the normal 10, 15, 20, 25, but it might be a 13, a 17, and a 21, as an example. And those are kind of things that you pre-prep with for very specific situations that you kind of want something that is kind of on paper telling you it's hard at that level. And then what's the next point? If it's a skills challenge, it's awarding them some XP. Don't forget your XP, people. Dish out XP whenever you get the opportunity. Good little bit of role play that moves a relationship forward, however small. You know, they get friendly talking with a shopkeeper, 10 XP. But we're not here to talk about XP. We're here to talk about skills. So, that brief rundown on what kind of form and flavour we see generally with a skills format of DCs is brilliant. But why does it help us at the table? what it does is it means that when players are engaging with opportunities to kind of move into environments or look at opponents from a different angle, specifically from a skills angle, it means that they're not rolling versus the DM. They're quite often rolling against the passive of the villain or monster or guard or whatever it might be. That's not always the case, because in some situations you might have particular monsters that are actively using the seek ability, as a kind of an on-tick action that they're constantly doing, because they're very dedicated, committed guards, very well trained, and they are actively seeking and so actively rolling perception checks. But if they're not the elite of the elite and the best of the best, and they're just ambling away a boring shift, guarding, the edge of a camp that they don't feel particularly threatened in, and they feel fairly confident, and they're kind of just lollygagging around, chances are they're probably just relying on their passives. Now, perception in Pathfinder 2e is quite a fierce and capable stat. It does a lot of many useful things, searching for traps, obviously seeking out opponents that might be hidden, trying to deduce if someone may be telling you pork pies, which is rhyming slang for lies, by the way. Bit of cockney there for you. But the reality is that quite often, if you're doing things like attempting to trip someone or using those kind of maneuvers in combat, you're already going up against these flat DCs. What's your acrobatics DC? I'm going to try and trip your character up, or whatever it might be. I'm going to try and disarm you. What's your athletics DC? The mechanics are already baked in. So from a player's perspective, it offers great opportunity to try things. When you look at your character, the one thing that strikes home outside of your attacks is you have good skills and you have a personalized variance of skills. And that's one of the great gifts that Pathfinder 2 gives. It doesn't say, this is the class you're playing, alright, these are the skills you have to have, which has very much been the form factor of D&D for as long as I played D&D, which was 3rd edition 3.5. I skipped 4th, looked a bit pants. Generally, the D&D community seem to agree. 5e does a very similar thing. It's very much like, here's a couple of skills, don't really care about skills, not really giving you any skills. Oh, you've got a couple, that's all you get. Which is massively disappointing, because, as I've often said, skills are the levers you pull to interact with the world. That's why they're there. That's why they've always been there. That's the purpose of skills. So don't shy away from them. When you look at your character and you think, oh, I like that skill, that's why I picked it. I've got that skill because it's useful to my class. This is something that came from my background, which I was kind of keen to get, and this is why I've got it. Use it. Always use it. Look for an opportunity to use it, because if you are coming up against a situation and you're going into a situation and skills will give you an advantage, take that advantage. Because Pathfinder 2 combat is quite fierce. It's mechanically built to be fierce. I've seen criticals annihilate villains and player characters. Fights can go quite wild and swingy when the crits start to drop, and with critical thresholds now being, I beat your armor class by 10, not I have to roll a 19 or a 20 on this particular weapon, or just a flat 20, it can suddenly really amp up, especially in the really big dramatic set piece fights where they're head to head, man to man, foe, kind of main villain boss kind of face off. Crits can happen, and especially with the kind of the big villains that are the kind of all singing, all dancing, end of session kind of, or end of kind of campaign piece bosses, who are the high challenge rating kind of solo creatures. Those crits can be even bigger, especially once you get into those kind of low mid to kind of high mid levels, where you might have weapons that are 2d8 plus your strength modifier, or even 3d8 plus your strength modifier. You're adding in an ability like sneak attack or You've got like a Bane rune on your weapon that adds an extra d6 against vampires, or whatever it might be. So when you're looking at combat, don't just look at combat and think, oh, right, okay, I'm going to roll my attacks and I'm going to try and get crits and hope I don't get crit. And if we all die because this is how it went down, oh, it's just a bad game. Stop, take a rain check, and look at your skills. To put this in context, my party went into a series of encounters in an abandoned village where there was a very high challenge rating monster, right at the kind of the upper limits of their kind of what was deemed sane on the challenge rating system. I knew it was there. They knew it was there. They didn't know where it was, but they knew it was in play. Now, they could have classically kicked in the doors, barreled into that scenario, and essentially bogged down in a series of ever serious and ever increasing combats until they were all dead, or the enemies were all dead. But the likelihood of sustaining big, protracted one combat to another combat to a dragged in to a drawn in combat, it's not particularly likely to go your way. The classic example is you open a door in a dungeon and there's a couple of orcs and you go in all guns blazing, but in the room next door they've got an ogre. It's that bit in Lord of the Rings. They've got a cave troll. That the way that once they're discovered in Moria, as they fight their way through to get out, once they're discovered, once the Fool of a Took knocks that bucket down the well and lets all the goblins know they're there, they go from being in control because they are stealthing and they are maneuvering through enemy territory unseen, to being trapped in that tomb facing ever increasing waves of goblins and then cave trolls, and some of them go down and it's really serious and eventually they escape that, but all that kerfuffle has awoken the Balrog, and then the really high level character has to say, "Fly, you fools," as he's dragged down into the abyss fighting the Balor, which obviously isn't a Balor, but in D&D and Pathfinder terms is a Balor, the Balrog. And there you go, you've lost a party member. That gives you a really good, I suppose, novel-based, story-based, and it is the classics. Let's go back to Tolkien every time. That's where all of this comes from. That's what can happen to your party, just as it happened to the Fellowship of the Ring. Now, my particular group, they used a series of reliable skills to get themselves inside the village, unseen, undetected. In the stealth video by Knights of Last Call, they'll break that down for you as to what I'm talking about. But the general gist of it was that they used something, and this is the next sweet spot of Pathfinder 2e. They used Follow the Expert. Ooh. Now, what this does, it gives you an absolute goldmine of boosts for your players. Once you become an expert in a skill, which normally happens around 3rd level, typically, when you start to get those picks for what your first pick is going to be. I have in my party a ninja. Now, they're not a ninja because they're using monk, but they are a ninja because they're a ninja. And we're just using the martial arts elements of monk to give them that kind of a build, but the gist is, socially in the world, their character is viewed as a ninja. An undead hunting ninja. Who has 3 ghost touch runes because she's a monk. Yeah, that's right. When you're in an undead forest and you're hanging out with an undead hunting monk, incorporeal creatures aren't such a problem. It would appear at level 3. But the premise was expert in stealth, and at that particular level, that player was enabled, once they used the follow the leader activity, to grant everyone else at the table a +6 on their stealth rolls using the follow the leader mechanic. Now, if you don't want a +6 on a roll, why are you bothering playing a game where we all want as many bonuses as we can get on a dice roll? But you think about what that does for a situation where maybe there is a member of the party who doesn't have stealth, or has a very low stealth because they've just got a half decent dex and they haven't bothered taking it as a skill because it's not something they were interested in. Now, in pretty much every other game, you have to fudge that, or they simply fail miserably and the plan falls apart, and everyone at the table is grumpy with Steve because Steve didn't take stealth, and two other people did, and he rolled a 3 and got a total of 5, and someone's hurt you, and they're coming looking, and it's all gone Pete Tong before it's begun. It's happened innumerable times in games that I have played in previous editions. This is such a problem in Dungeons and Dragons that Matt Mercer has homebrewed rules where someone rolls for the party, and then if that is successful, it's successful. Now, that's a little bit cheesemonger. I can understand exactly why he's done it, because that problem is absolutely crippling, and especially in 5e where you are so like ruthlessly punished on the you haven't got any skills, or you've got 2 skills. My favourite joke, the ranger in 5e doesn't get survival as a skill by default. What is the ranger's job? Imagine Lord of the Rings. If Aragorn was a 5e ranger, he'd be useless. He wouldn't have any of the survival skills to travel in the wilds and guide them through all those encounters where simply surviving and travelling across the land in the form of navigation and lighting campfires and getting everyone kind of safe and secured against the kind of the elements and fed and watered in those kind of wilderness environments. You need survival for that. There's not I can just yep it because we don't like to play that at my table. Well, what game are you playing then? I mean, just keep bashing X and play your Xbox. If you don't want to use your skills, I just use the fast attack. X. Oh, my character died. Must be a rubbish game. You've got to have some element of that in your game. You have to. Otherwise, it isn't the game. That's why they exist. That's why they're on paper. That's why you have a character sheet with things like hit points and skills and attack rolls. It's all there because it's part of the game. Now, follow the expert meant that this particular party kicked my ass. It was brilliant. I mean, it was absolute strategic gold. They, instead of assaulting the town and getting into a fight with the sentries that kind of skulked the perimeter, that would have, if alerted, drawn the kind of the if you like the inner kind of guards from their guard posts or their rest places of rests into protracted combats, that would have also inevitably alerted the big bad and the big bad's kind of guardian. And they'd have come piling in at full chat, all geared up in their armour and their equipment with all their spells ready because they were ready, because the alarm bells had been rung, because the party had gone in all guns blazing. But that didn't happen. Follow the expert. Stealth. 25s, 26s, rolling against passives. Because, obviously, they're not the elite of the elite. They're not all there going, I'm going to find them. I know they're coming. I've got a sixth sense that tells me they're coming, even though there's no way in God's green earth I could know they were coming in without metagaming nonsense from the GM. It's not fair. It's not right. Now, sometimes that's not the case. Like I said earlier, sometimes in a threatened environment where they feel threatened and there's been protracted combats where they know something is about to happen, about to go down, they probably are seeking. But if they still beat that check, they still sneak in. And they snuck in. And once they'd snuck in, they climbed up using Follow the Expert athletics from another player, and they got up onto the roof of the building where they knew the big bad was, because they were using survival checks to follow his trail. And they bypassed loads of encounters, and they got up on the roof, and they crept in through a first floor window, and they murdered a guy in his sleep because he was a villain, and they were in his room, and he was still asleep because they stealthed in past his punished passive, because he was literally snoring in his bed. dead. Criticals aplenty. One of them has got some deception. One of them took the guy's uniform that was hung very kindly on the side, because why would you sleep in your armour? It's uncomfortable, and you've got a bed, and you're no longer on duty. And then he went out with deception, rolling against passive perceptions because he looks like a member of the cult. He's camouflaged himself. He's come out of a room where they know one of them is sleeping, and only one of them has come out in the guy's uniform. And Bob's your uncle. He's there. He sneaks around. He gets an idea of what's going down. He gets an idea of movements, of positions of the enemy, logistics. He even finds where the main target is, eating his meal. And then they go back and they plant some poison in a drink, and they go in and he's delivered the drink. And the villain had a passive perception of 20. Not a passive of 14 or a passive of 12 or a passive of 17. A passive perception of 20. And if you roll 20 on your perception check, you'd be pretty confident that you'd done something of use at some level as a player. 20 is not to be snubbed at. But he got a roll of a 21 on his deception skill. So basically he was rolling against a hard DC. It wasn't a versus roll, because the villain was sat having successfully achieved the tasks that he had been set by his evil undead master, eating a meal to celebrate his objective completed and his missions achieved. And he was given a drink with poison in it, and eventually he drank some, and they waited outside, having locked some guards in a room that were playing poker so that they couldn't bustle out and attack them. And suddenly they hear choking because he's finally drank some of the poison drink and has started taking the effects of poison, which they double dosed, which meant I bumped up the DC by 2. And boom, suddenly they're bursting in, and he's sat kind of in his chair at his dinner table, kind of choking on poison, and it's initiative rolls as they kind of throw the door open and come in, and he rolls quite well, but it wasn't a fantastic roll, and they stack up, and boom, he gets his head cut off, because at one point he gets crit towards the end of the fight, having kind of got engaged by several people in combat while sat at a table, not wearing his armour, because how many people in real life go around in their full, combat regalia whilst they're in the inner sanctum of their safe little secret village lair? Not many. And there you go. One dead boss. Except he wasn't the full boss, because he actually worked for someone far worse just outside of town, who they then had to go and deal with. But they absolutely closed it down. And that was the power of skills. If they'd have gone into that fight head on, they'd have had to have faced him at full chat with all his gear and all his spells prepared and all his armour and all his protective qualities and his bodyguard. But they jumped him, and they bypassed his bodyguard, because his bodyguard was a Doulahan. Beheaded undead, you hold the head, you control the Doulahan, it has to do your bidding. He had the head on him, it was in a bag next to his chair. He never got an action off to grab it and use it and summon the Doulahan before he died. And even if he had, he'd have died before it got in the room, because they'd piled in, they'd got so many advantages stacked up in their favour because of skills. So next time you're looking at a combat situation and you're kind of a bit twitchy and a bit nervous, don't be afraid to gamble on what can be achieved with your skills before you have to start firing off shots. Who knows what you'll pull off? Who knows what hijinks you'll achieve with the old skills? So, hopefully you've enjoyed that video. Hopefully you've now been inspired to go and deploy the wonderful and varied choice of skills that you have chosen for your characters in new and exciting ways, or simply ways that they're meant to be used. Throw down a deception check to see if you can, pull the wool over someone's eyes and get a blag on the go. See if you can, trip a guy and push him down some stairs, rather than try and duke it out with him and risk a hit point, battle where you might not necessarily win. Because if you push him down the stairs with a successful trip, he's going to take falling damage, and at the bottom, he's going to be prone, which means he's going to burn actions getting up and getting back to you, which gives you the opportunity to do what? Maybe run away and escape. You don't have to even fight and win every combat. Sometimes combats are there for the purpose of driving you back, pushing you away, keeping you off an objective. See what you can do with your skills, and then let me know in the comments down below what madness and shenanigans you've managed to pull off, because you had mad skills. And that is the end of my video. Peace out, and I will see you all again soon on the next video. Bye!